Real People, Real Matters. This is Diana Tulchinsky with my first guest, Eric Beauchamp. Eric, please tell me about your earlier life.
Well, I was raised, I grew up in around the Columbus, Ohio area, and went to school there, went to Ohio State University, and studied psychology there. When I got out, I changed courses and started in kind of the business world into technology, and worked for a company in Ohio, and then came to Chicago.
What companies were you working for in the software
So
industry?
in Ohio, I worked for a company called Microelectronics. You might know the stores here called Micro Center stores.
Oh, yes, I remember. They were
So
popular.
I worked in a division of theirs that did notebook computers before notebook computers were what they are today, kind of the early revolution of notebook computers. When I left there, I came to Chicago and I started working for IBM, and then from IBM to Microsoft.
Oh, I remember like the huge 486s. And
Yeah,
the huge,
yep.
Yes.
Yeah, we
I
actually,
remember that.
one of our first ones was a 386. So it was,
I
you know,
remember, yes.
black and white screens, small, and then the evolution of those over time. So we were kind of on the leading edge of kind of the mail order business when you used to get the magazines and look up the ads and call a phone number to order your computers versus the internet.
How did you transfer from psychology to computers?
I was working with microelectronics while I was in college, and I realized at that point that while I loved psychology and loved how the human mind worked, I didn't think I had the wherewithal to like sit down and listen to people, or as a career. And I enjoyed technology. I enjoyed the fast-paced nature of how it changed and how you had to keep up with it. And so then I decided, well, I have my degree.
Yes.
And I have technology, so that's the direction I was going to pursue.
It's similar to what people are doing now, the millennials, similar to that. And with psychology, I'm just wondering, were you like studying multiple personality disorder, schizophrenia, and all of those severe disorders?
So I enjoyed, that was kind of the biggest piece I enjoyed was the abnormal psychology piece of it. One of my favorite classes was the abnormal psych class. And we actually went to a St. Valentine's Day dance at a mental correctional facility. It was one of the most enjoyable evenings I've had, going in and interacting one-on-one with the criminally insane. And it was an eye-opener to how far you could deviate from the normal.
Oh, wow.
I met Superman. I met a couple presidents. You meet a lot of different people when you go to a mentally insane prison.
So tell me, why didn't you become an art therapist, or you didn't have that opportunity yet?
At that time, I've always been like a maker and kind of into science and experimenting, but it wasn't my focus at that time. I was focused on business and career and making money, and that was what was driving me at that time. It wasn't until probably the last 10, 12 years before I really started embracing the creative side. I always made things and always figured out ways to do things that didn't exist, but I never really ever thought it was an option.
And for your second career change, please tell me more about it.
So I spent a number of years in technology. Then I went from hardware to software to IBM and to Microsoft, working with kind of the software side of business and the burgeoning world of e-commerce. So I worked a lot with the e-commerce world, going in and explaining what e-commerce was, because it didn't exist at that time.
Now people, I remember those magazines, and this is like a little shopping cart, and that's e-commerce.
Exactly. So with my IBM, I worked with their net commerce part, and then I left there. I went to Microsoft and started working with their e-commerce.
Microsoft, the company.
So I worked with their e-commerce and database solutions, and then I got to a point where the drive for the career drive, I guess it would be a pseudo burnout.
You had that.
Yeah, it was. When you're working with a company like Microsoft, you tend to have, it's kind of like drinking from a fire hose. You'd be emailing or texting someone at 3 in the morning, and you'd see them at 6 in the morning the next day for a meeting.
So it was kind of like, like the mortgage or the stocks that drove your next career.
Correct. So when I left Microsoft, I decided that I wanted to do something that was a little more fulfilling, and so I went into real estate.
Oh, yeah.
And so I always said that when you helped a young family buy their home, there was a feedback you got that you never got selling software. You could sell a multi-million-dollar software package and a solution, but no one would ever say thank you, or never say, you made a difference in my life. And then you'd start working with a family, and you got them their first house, where their
nice.
kids were going to be born, and where they're going to grow up, and there was a joy to that experience for people, and I was what drove me in that piece was that interaction with people.
Oh, that must be interesting. So you went from Microsoft to real estate, which I'm sure is a very complicated industry, and it's still like 8 o'clock in the morning and 8 o'clock in the evening. And
It changed. It was more of a 24-hour day job. It was whenever your clients needed you, worked, but it was different. It wasn't. The pressures were different. They were on me solely. So as real estate, it's your job. You control how much you do, how much if you're successful or not.
Yes.
It's really in your own hands, and I enjoyed that that control. But I remember my wife and I were in Morocco for vacation, and at 3 a.m. I'm in an internet cafe, on a IP phone call. It's back to the U.S. working on deals, because with the time change and what I needed to do, that's where I had to be.
How did you meet your wife, by the way?
I've been with my wife since 1991. We met through a friend of when I was at a college job. I used to work at a hotel, and one of her friends worked at the hotel, and we met playing pool one night, and here we are.
Oh, nice.
I won't say how many years, because
So tell me, what were the benefit? What cooled you off in the real estate industry?
well, mostly there were two kind of intersecting points at the same time. One, the market crashed, which was a big thing. And then my wife and I had twins.
Oh, nice.
And so those two intersected at the exact same time. The markets went down, the real estate market tanked, and we had children. And so I made a conscious decision at that point of saying, I'm going to slow down the real estate business, mostly because I had to.
Yes.
And I'm going to spend some time with my kids. I'm going to take that opportunity that most fathers don't get, most parents don't get,
Yes.
is to spend the time with their kids when they're young. And so my wife and I kind of worked out a program where she could still work full time, I could still do real estate when I could, and we could take care of the kids, and we wouldn't have to have a nanny or sitters and that kind of thing. And we've made a balance, and so I was fortunate enough to be able to spend that time with my kids when they're grown up, and it's they're 9 years old now.
Wow.
And
they're
so
really
it's
grown up.
it's an experience I wouldn't go back and change.
How did you discover being in the Artist or the Noise Cultural Center?
So that actually came pretty much at the same time. So as I said, I've always made things, and I've always been kind of a woodworker and a creator. When my kids were born, I started making things for them. So I started doing a lot of woodworking and a lot of constructions. So I made them big castle beds, and then people started seeing what I was making, and then they'd say, "Can you do something for me?" And so the first initial pass was going into woodworking and custom, unique, one-off projects, and I still do quite a bit of that. The art that you see here is kind of a derivative of that process. So I started doing that more and more, and so the real estate started sliding back a little bit farther, and I started doing more of the work, the custom woodworking and creation. And so I got to a point where I had received a request to make a table that had the Colorado River Delta carved into the surface of the table. And so I started looking for reference photos so I could lay out the artwork so I could start the carving. And I came across a photo of the process that these are based off of, and they're called Lichtenberg figures.
Lichtenberg?
Lichtenberg, right. So it's the scientist that initially discovered the process.
The burning of the wood or
So
burning
it's
on top?
his initial process was different. It was a process where he would run electricity through, like, I believe it was like a red sulfur powder, and would create these fractal patterns, these self-replicating patterns across the surface, what you see on the very fine detail level of my art. And then I'm not sure where it transitioned into someone trying it on wood. But the process was very static. They put in the experiment, they put a nail in one end of a board, a nail at the other end of the board, and they'd start the electrical current. And what we're doing is we're passing a very high voltage current. I work anywhere from, say, 6,000 volts to 15,000 volts across the surface.
That must be very, very hot and very experimental with your hands and safety-wise.
Yeah, so it's a really high voltage, but it's a very low amperage. So getting into this nitty-gritty science part of it is, so the two components of electrical current, you have amperage and you have your voltage. So your house voltage might be 120 volts at 15 or 20 amps. I'm working at 15,000 volts, but at a much lower amperage.
Oh, okay.
So I'm at like 30 to 60 milliamps. It's still potentially dangerous. I can tell you from experience, it's very painful. If you get when you get shocked.
It might be. I mean, like have you experimented and the lights just turned off and then?
No, it's I don't blow a ton of
Or the
circuits.
electricity in your arm just felt a little bit different.
Oh, I get shocked frequently. So,
yeah.
so what I've done is, so the initial scientific process is very static. They put a nail in one board, nail at the other. They clip on two leads to them, and then they coat the surface with, typically it's like a baking soda and water solution, an electrolyte that's mildly conductive. And then they turn the power on, and so that electricity starts flowing across the surface of the wood. And as it's going across, it's actually degrading the wood underneath. The movement of the current is burning the wood underneath, and that's what creates the structures. But you couldn't control it. You can't control it. It's a random process of what you get is what you get. And so when I was looking at it for the table, it didn't work because I couldn't control the flow, and I couldn't say where it was going to go, and I couldn't lay it out the way I wanted. And so I set it aside, and I finished the table, and I kept thinking about it because I was drawn to the patterns and to the structures. And so I started playing with the process, and then as I went with the process, this just kind of started to evolve. I said, well, I can't control it. How can I control it? So I went down the rabbit hole for about a year or so, working on the process of how can I lay it out and make it go where I want it to go and create the shapes and forms I want. And then I said, okay, we started figuring it out. And over the years, I've gotten progressively better at creating the techniques that allow me to control the flow. And then I started tackling, the next piece was the solutions that you use. They are typically, for baking soda and water is somewhat caustic to wood. It changes the color.
Yes.
So it'll change it to a gray-brown color. If you sand that out, you lose a lot of the really fine detail. So I went back into the rabbit hole and spent another about 6 months, about 300 different chemical solutions, trying to find one that would provide the same structures that I wanted. It had the right conductivity and the right makeup, but wouldn't stain the wood, and more importantly, wouldn't kill me when it was burned. And so over time, I found one that worked. And so I was able to now control the flow and control the coloration of the wood. And so then I was able to I could expand it from very small scale to much larger scale. So now I work upwards to 4 foot by 8 foot, 5 by 10 foot pieces.
That's your custom pieces that
Correct.
you can do.
Correct. And so I've taken a static process and been able to convert it and change it so that I can make it do the things I want. And a lot of what kind of the evolution of my art is, there's no textbook, there's no guide, there's no course saying how to do this. No one's done it. And I said everyone's done very small scale work, but no one's ever done anything, at least to my knowledge. There may be someone somewhere in the world who has figured out the same things I have. But no one's done it, so there's no guidebook. And so it's a lot of experimentation. It's a lot of failure.
Yes.
Trying something, failing, trying something new, failing, until you get the right thing. And that kind of falls in with, my maker passes. You fail all the time when you're doing something that no one's ever done. If you're making even if you're making a furniture piece that doesn't exist, you have the core structures of woodworking,
Yes.
but there's no
The
plans.
craftsman, the artistic style.
Right. So there's no plans. There's no, this piece should be this wide and this piece should be this long and this is how you should connect them together. You have to create that, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't.
What's the background? Like, how did you make that green behind, like one of your wooden panels?
So the process, so once I've kind of laid everything out, typically what I do with my piece is I'll sketch everything out and lay out the structure and the kind of composition of the piece. And then I'll do the burns, and then I come through and I clean it up, get the chemical solution off, the chemical residue, get any soot or ash that's built up. And once I've done that, then I start with the color. And what I'll do is I'll take wood dyes and coloration in tints, and I'll either apply them directly to the piece, or I will take them and I will add them to a clear UV protective coat and use it as kind of a tone coat. I'll start layering on color after color until it builds to the color depth that I want. It allows me to more control of the color saturation in a piece.
Please tell me, how many years were you involved in the Glenview Art show?
So I do a lot of regional art shows. I've been doing the art in the Glen for the last 2 or 3 years or so. And thankfully I have a number of customers and clients, hopefully happy clients,
Yes.
here in Glenview as well.
Do you have any tips for people who are struggling, who are burnt out, or even for high schoolers who are thinking about going to psychology or even into craftsmanship?
Yeah,
Or art therapy, for example.
Right. In my general take, I talk to a lot of younger artists. I'm involved in an organization in Chicago called the Pumping Station 1. It's a makerspace, and I run their wood shop there. And so there's 500 members or so that belong to Pumping Station, from 18-year-old kids to 60, 70-year-old people who are all there making different things. So we have wood shop, we have metals, we have welding, we have computer controlled routers and laser cutters and 3D printers. So you get this wide range of folks that come in, and I get to talk to a lot of people who are in school, who are there like studying art and things like that. And my advice always is, there is no one set path to life.
Oh.
And I'm a perfect example of that. I started studying psychology thinking I was going to be a therapist, and I realized that wasn't the right path for me. And so I changed. I went into technology, realized I wasn't happy, so I changed again. And so it's a kind of an evolution. So what I would always say to people is, pick what your passion is now, do it, and if your passion changes and you're capable of making the change, then change.
And I was just wondering, how do you like the Glenview Library? I know you are hosting a lot of these art. You can go in the front door and you can see a lot of these. How do you like the education or the resources like you see in the North Shore area, like a lot of the schools and everything else?
It's fantastic. I mean, from an art perspective, the North Shore and Glenview specific, it really embraces the arts, and I was thrilled about the opportunity when I received a call from the library saying that they wanted to host my art. For an artist, it's always great to to be able to get your art in front of people so they can see it. Even beyond just selling art, but it's also just so that people can appreciate it, because that's really why you make it. It's nice to sell it, but it's also it's nice to be even when you do these art shows, it's always nice to have people, even if they don't buy anything, to stop in and take in your art and comment to you about
How many people are concerned about the electricity in your hands?
I get that frequently.
Like life, it's selling you life insurance or
Yeah.
something at the door.
Well, actually, my insurance company doesn't know what I do, actually.
Oh.
And we would cut that. It's actually funny. I get a lot of artists that come talk to me, but I'm a specific draw to electrical engineers.
Oh, yeah.
Almost any electrical engineer who walks by stops. And I actually keep a tally in the back of how many electrical engineers I talk to and how many think I'm going to live or how many think I'm going to die. Or the potential to die.
Potential of being electrocuted.
And so far, I think the tally, I don't remember exactly, but I think it was 9 to 3 over the last year. 9 think that I'm fine, I'm not going to die. 3 think there's a potential for me to kick the bucket. Now, I always tell them, I say, hey, a dead artist, their art goes up in value. They should make an investment.
How many hours does a typical custom piece make in the Noise Cultural Center?
So a custom piece, when you start burning, there are so many different variables, some that I know, some I don't quite understand and what makes things go. But some pieces, you can just the burning component, not the finishing and the rest of the process. But the burn can take 2 hours. I have a piece now that I'm working on that I'm 25 hours into the burn. So there are the variables in the window of things working the way they should, and where they shouldn't is very narrow. And so if a piece becomes too conductive, things won't happen. If it's not conductive enough, things won't happen. I really think there's a star alignment issue somewhere in there where, if the moon's in retro phase or something, it doesn't work quite well. So it's just a part of understanding when it's not working, and I'll stop. Then if something becomes too conductive, I have to let it dry out. I have to kind of remove the conductive material and let it dry, and then come back and start again. But it varies so much. I mean, some nights I'm making great progress.
Oh, yes.
And it varies also. A lot of the techniques I developed really stunt the flow, allow me more control, but make it much, much slower. And so, the process may go, if I'm using a certain technique, may take a much longer process to make it to go the direction I want.
Do you have any favorite craftsmen in Chicago or any famous artists that you're drawn to?
Someone here in Chicago, there's so many people that I respect. I wouldn't be able to give you one specific artist in general that I appreciate. I tend to like the more abstract.
Kandinsky.
Zhivagan is one of my favorites, larger scale. I'm not your typical artist, to be fair. If you figure outsider art, I'm probably fall somewhere between the guy in his backyard making art out of tin cans and the classically trained artist. I fall somewhere in that range.
Yes.
So I don't have that art background. I kind of came in this kind of through
vocational arts.
Yes. Yeah. It's I guess it would be more kind of the experimental type of art. It's just kind of, and this is actually one of the problems I have when I go to apply for art festivals and things like that, is I don't fit into a specific category. I'm not a painter. I don't paint. I use tints and dyes and pigments, but I don't paint.
How much is this piece valued?
This one is, say, $700.
$700. Oh,
so they range. I make small pieces that are, 8 by 10s. They range.
In the kitchen, you can put that
exactly.
in.
Yeah, and what a lot of people do with those is, they'll do, multiples and create collages on their walls, and then they go upwards to, I said 4 foot by 10 foot, 4 by 8 foot. Really, it's just the only thing that constrains me is the size of the palette material that I can work with. But those work up into the thousands.
Do you have any plans to expand your studio or more craftsmanship?
So right now I'm a resident artist at the Noise Culture Arts Center. It's in Evanston. It's a city-owned building that hosts a number of artists and theaters, so Piven Theater, Actors Gymnasium. There's a lot of painters and sculptors, and then there's me, the one-off. And so my studio now, for where I'm at now, is a pretty decent space. Yeah, I'm always evolving.
Yes.
And so the things that I made 3 or 4 years ago, I don't do anymore. The art that I make is evolving.
Perfectionist.
Yeah, it's I want to do something, and so for example, I wanted to add depth to my art, and so I couldn't figure out how can I do depth. And so I started experimenting with gunpowders, laying on gunpowders to the surface and igniting those and getting those to go off. So it evolves. So now that I work with gunpowders, I started thinking about, is it possible to use the same technique or similar technique to do woodblock printing? And so now I'm working on that. That may be another year or two before I figure it out and figure out how to get it to work the way that I want it to work. And so it's all an evolution of the process.
It is an evolution to artism and just general appreciation of this fine art.
Thank you.
Thank you, Eric Beauchamp, for this wonderful interview about your art.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you for watching Real People, Real Matters. This is Diana Tulchinsky. Please watch us again.